The kettle whistled, the rain tapped. And on Belfast's narrow streets, a barefoot boy chased the bread van while a woman scrubbed her doorstep for the third time that week. Coal smoke hung in the air, but something heavier lingered too, something unspoken. This wasn't just life in Northern Ireland, it was survival, with a smile, fear behind curtains, and hope in a boiled potato. Before the chaos fully erupted, people still lived, laughed, and tried to hold on to normal. This is what it truly felt like in the 1960s. Life in Northern Ireland during the 1960s was built on bricks, smoke, and stubborn pride. Row houses lined the streets like tight teeth, each one nearly identical, yet fiercely claimed as home. Children played hopscotch outside front doors, while mothers leaned over iron gates to share gossip, recipes, or silent glances of worry. The back gardens weren't really gardens, just small yards fenced by soot-stained walls and wire, but they held life. Laundry lines full of white shirts, old bikes with bent wheels, and potatoes growing in broken crates. Every patch of soil was claimed, and every square inch had a purpose. It was a working-class world where pride came from hard hands and fixed routines. Neighbours watched each other's children, even when they disagreed. The streets were rough, but they raised you, taught you to be tough, to say little, and to keep going. It was a kind of order before the storm. The day often began with a hiss of gas and the whistle of a teapot. Tea wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual, poured to soothe, offered to apologise, or shared to survive. Every home had a favourite cup, chipped maybe, but treasured like gold. Food came fresh from local butchers, greengrocers and travelling bread vans. The bread run was sacred. Mothers sent kids with coins clutched tight, hoping for a loaf still warm. Sometimes, if you smiled just right, the baker would slip you an extra roll. Markets buzzed with life. Even when money was tight, people bartered, planned, stretched every shilling to feed a family of 7 with pride. There were no freezers, no deliveries, no waste, just instinct, memory, and 100 ways to make stew. And still, no meal began without tea. Before the streets burned with headlines, they pulsed with music. In small town halls and upstairs clubs, young hearts danced to show bands, playing Elvis covers and Irish ballads. The music gave them something that nothing else could: escape, rhythm, romance. It made the bad days feel far away, at least for a night. Friday dances were the social lifeline. Boys wore too much hair cream, girls borrowed dresses, and everyone knew who was watching whom. These nights weren't just fun. They were freedom from small rooms, angry fathers and long weeks. Couples formed on dance floors and sometimes stayed together for life. The walls of those halls absorbed secrets, first kisses, even fights. They offered a space where religion, class, or trouble didn't matter for a few hours. The music didn't fix the world outside, but inside, it made people feel like they owned it. It was impossible to walk through a street in Northern Ireland without knowing who was Catholic and who was Protestant. Not because people always said it, but because everything said it for them. From which school you attended, to where you shopped, even the football team you supported, faith marked your place in the world. Church bells shaped the week. Sundays meant full pews, pressed shirts, and silent reverence. Clergy weren't just spiritual leaders, they were community voices, moral compasses, and political influences. Children memorized verses more easily than maths, and public prayers opened more than just services. They opened meetings, dinners, even arguments. Behind closed doors, things weren't always peaceful. There were families who taught love, and others who taught fear of the other side. Walls may not have been painted with slogans yet, but the divides were real, and already older than the children growing up between them. By the late 1960s, you didn't need to read the newspaper to know something was changing. You could hear it in the chants, see it in the marches, and feel it in your chest. Men stood outside with folded arms, not talking. Women closed windows quicker than before. The tension was everywhere, thick as chimney soot. Civil rights protests began to grow. People demanded fair housing, fair jobs, fair schools, but fairness felt like a dangerous word. Catholics were often denied jobs or forced to wait years for housing, while Protestants held the power. The system wasn't just unfair, it was built to be that way. What started with peaceful signs and voices slowly turned into firebombs and barricades. Some saw it as rebellion, others as survival, but for many it was just terrifying. Neighbours who once shared sugar stopped looking each other in the eye. The Troubles hadn't fully arrived, but they were already inside the houses. Long before headlines spoke of bombs and bullets, children played in cobblestone alleys with nothing but chalk, sticks, and unstoppable laughter. They raced rusty prams, built go-karts from scrap, and turned gutters into rivers for paper boats. Shoes were optional. Curfews were a suggestion. School was strict, but strangely comforting. Teachers ruled with wooden rulers and sharp eyes, but many kids felt safer there than at home. They learned to spell, to sing hymns, and to watch their words depending on who sat next to them. Even recess could be divided, unspoken but understood. To be a child in the 1960s was to live a double life, one of innocence and one of unspoken warning. Most kids didn't fully grasp the divide, but they carried it in how they walked home, which streets they avoided, and which names they never said out loud. For many women in Northern Ireland, factory life was not just a job, it was a rhythm, a lifeline, and a kind of freedom. The hum of sewing machines echoed across Belfast and Derry, stitching clothes, curtains, and livelihoods. Girls left school early to earn wages, and mothers clocked in after the morning tea was poured. Inside the factories, the pace was brutal. Hands moved faster than thought. Wages stayed low, and gossip flowed as steadily as thread. Yet for many women, this was their space, away from children, husbands, and sometimes even silence. Friendships were sown between shifts, and pride came in the form of full lunch tins and a clean apron. Though the economy was fragile, these factories kept families afloat. They gave working-class women a voice, a paycheck, and a sense of purpose in a country that often overlooked them. The jobs didn't promise much, but they promised just enough. Before television took over every living room, news came folded, inky, and shouted from street corners. Local newspapers were the pulse of each community, carried under arms, read at bus stops and debated over tea. Every town had its own paper, and every name printed in it became a story, whether for good or for scandal. Reporters weren't distant figures, they were neighbours, cousins, even former classmates. They captured weddings, factory strikes, football scores, and church fates with equal weight. A photo in the local page could make someone feel like royalty or shame an entire family. The line between private and public was thin, and everyone read everything. For working-class families, the newspaper was more than information. It was connection. It told them who had died, who had married, who was in trouble, and who was building something new. Before the shouting got louder, it was these quiet headlines that shaped how a community saw itself. By the late 1960s, something had shifted in Northern Ireland. The days felt shorter, the silences longer, and the air seemed to carry more than just fog. Conversations in shops paused when the wrong surname was mentioned. Friends stopped visiting certain streets. Some changes came quietly, but they stayed. What began as political tension seeped into everyday life. You could feel it in the way people crossed the street, the glances exchanged in church pews, the sudden quiet when children asked too much. Fear was no longer about the future. It was about tomorrow, or even tonight. And yet, life didn't stop. People still went to work, packed lunches, swept porches and sang lullabies, but the laughter came less easily, and the trust that once held neighbours together began to fray. The divide wasn't just political, it was personal, and it had only just begun. They didn't call it resilience, they just lived. They lit fires in cold kitchens, scrubbed porches until their hands cracked, and stretched a few coins to feed 7 mouths. Behind every window was a story of survival, of sacrifice, of stubborn hope. They laughed when they could, loved quietly and carried on, even when the world outside began to fall apart. It wasn't just a decade, it was a test of dignity, of identity, of how much a community could endure without losing its soul. The 60s in Northern Ireland weren't simple, but they were real, and that reality shaped generations. Could you have endured life back then? Subscribe to keep memory alive.